So Latham snipe, who knows what they are? Yeah? We've kind of got the word out a bit lately. They're a cryptic little bird. They breed up in Japan and, as we've learnt, southern Russia. And originally their distribution or their migratory paths went further out to the east, to the west. But now what we're learning is they've got quite a direct route between Australia and Japan. And they spend all of their non-breeding season in Australia and they don't breed here at all. And their behaviour is very different. So they're really cryptic in Australia. In Japan, they fly around and they call and they sit on light posts and, you know, they're an interesting little bird. And I was quite shocked when I went to Japan to see their behaviour because I had never seen anything like it. And just the last year, because we don't know a lot about them, they haven't been properly protected in some ways, but just last year they got upgraded to vulnerable under the EPBC Act because their numbers are thought to be declining, but without just that, that's just based on survey data. And so because of the limited data, we're able to make that decision, but we don't know anything else much about them other than they turn up and then they leave again at different times of the year. And that's what sparked my interest when I was at Jera. These little birds would come in July, August, and then they'd be gone again in March, April, and I was like, what are they doing all that time? Just as a layperson. And so that got us interested. And then we worked out that Jera wetlands is actually a real hot spot for them. We did lots of surveys around Canberra. And the other beauty of Jera is you've got all these photographers everywhere. So we were like giving out tea towels and all sorts of bottles of champagne and everything. If people would get good photos of them and send them to us. And that's unusual in bird research because normally you're sort of out in a wetland in the middle of nowhere with no people. So we're very lucky. And because of that, we've involved pretty much everyone and anyone who's wanted to be a part of this project has been welcomed. And so we've got like 120 odd people and dozens of organisations who just come and do what they feel like doing at different times, including the Wild Bird Society in Japan, who we work with frequently and use it as an excuse to go on holidays occasionally. So that's really exciting. So some of their habitats, when you look at the distribution, that, as I said, that path out to the west, we've pretty much scrubbed out now with our current research. So the predominant path is Australia, Eastern Australia, all the way up to mostly, they'll travel through Honshu, but mostly Hokkaido and Sakhalin in southern Russia seems to be where they're dominant. And then when you look at their habitat types in Australia down the bottom and then Japan up the top, they're fairly similar. But what we notice in Japan is they are closer to woodlands. So here they're happy to be open areas on the fringes of urban areas. And in Japan, they tend to be more remote, closer to woodland areas as well. So that's an interesting observation. I'm looking at some habitat management at the moment. But the main threats to Latham snipe over the years have been hunting, right up till the 1980s in Australia, which surprised me because I thought, it was something that happened in the past. And this photo up the top right is a 15-year-old boy with his father, and they got the biggest cat, and they were in the paper for it. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And so as the birds have they were protected as migratory, and that's actually what started the Japan-Australia Migratory Bird Agreement to stop hunting. Part of our commitment was to stop hunting. But now the poor birds are mostly threatened by housing because they do dwell on urban fringes primarily. Agriculture, not so much. They're very adaptable to agriculture. And then just general disturbance, human disturbance. So that's what we're kind of looking at now, that we're not hunting them. But Sakhalin in Russia, they still hunt them regularly up there. And the problem with that is that's where they breed. So here, if you knocked off a few, okay, they can probably survive. But if we wipe out areas of breeding, that's a major issue. So we're actually, when I say we, I'm talking about Bagita in this example. She's actually been up there and worked with the birders in southern Russia to try to raise that awareness and then provide support to the groups that are trying to protect them up there, of which there are. It's very remote, harsh country though, up in that part of the world. And so we thought, well, on the basis of all of this, we were like, well, don't we just do things to protect them? And then we were like, well, we don't know anything about them. So then we went down this path of saying, well, what do we need to know? And up until last year, in fact, their listing was based on fairly minimal information, but it was enough to make that listing. But we really haven't known their true conservation status, and you can imagine how hard it is to monitor this moving population of birds where the juveniles leave 2 weeks after the adults from their breeding site. How they know how to get here, I'll never know, but they, you're looking at 2 different moving populations, and thousands of blue leg flags were put on birds in Japan, and I think we've sighted 2 here. So leg flags aren't a really reliable method, and I don't think they've had any of our orange ones. So it hasn't been a really good way to survey them, but it is exciting when the same bird comes back with the leg flag you put on last year at the same time. And so then we're also looking at 2 scales. We're looking at their migratory movement and then local movement. What habitat do they need? What are they doing here? And that's the area I've been looking at, or thought I was looking at, until we got the results of some of the data back. But that's just the focus. So to summarise, we know a lot about biology. Narding in the 80s did a lot on that in relation to Jamba. We've known a little bit about where they go, although we're revising that, but we've known very little about their ecology and movement and habitat use, which is what we're addressing. So this project's been a journey. We've done the leg flags, in 2016 we surveyed all the hotspots in Canberra, all the recorded areas in Canberra to get hotspots. National surveys 3 days a year on the same day, all up and down the coast and inland. We did radio tracking, which is just where you go around with the little thing that it beeps and you know where they are. Geolocators are tricky because you've got to catch the bird back. They're this tiny little light level locator, light level recorder, attaches to the leg flag, let the bird go and hope you catch it again. And catching the first bird took 6 weeks. And it involves waiting for the birds to leave at night. They go off to forage, setting up mist nets. Takes till about midnight. At 3 a.m. you go and unfurl them. At 5 a.m. your team hides in the grass and waits for the birds to come back quietly. And then just within about 2 minutes of first light, after the birds are back, we stand up and walk at the nets and hope to catch whatever we can before it's light enough for them to see the nets. So it's just to work that out took 6 weeks. It wasn't and so to catch one back, you're going, oh, for heaven's sake. But I'll just park that thought for a minute. And then we use satellite trackers, which are too heavy to get accurate readings for little birds. So we had to go with what's called PTT devices, which use Doppler. So they're not very accurate, and they're $6,000 for one tracker. So you can imagine we didn't have many trackers with our budget, which was about zero, apart from the help of the ACT government and BirdLife Australia and a few others that have contributed. And then a couple of years ago, I found these GPS Bluetooth devices that were $200 each, really little, light, and the only minor detail is we had to build a tower at the wetlands. We built a tower, we found some cattle yards to put it on, and we have a receiver. So the receiver's $1,200, the devices are $200, and the accuracy is down to 5 metres. So after 8 years of just slugging away trying to get this information, we finally found something. And at the time we had some indication that site fidelity has never been described for snipe. But what we started to notice is some of the leg flags were being re-sighted within years and between years. And so that gave us an indication. We were like, wow, some of these birds are coming back from Japan every year. So it gave us a little bit of confidence. We never expected to get a bird back, but we thought they might stay there for the season, which is what we based that on. And it didn't cost much, so we were pretty happy. And so with the surveys that we do, there's a lot of survey sites, but people do it differently. So some people flush the birds out, which is what they're supposed to be doing. But sometimes you can't access sites, like sewage ponds are lovely habitat for snipe. We get a lot of them at Fishwick. They're not really there roosting, they're just eating fossicking around foraging. So some areas like that, our surveyors can't access. So they're doing observational, and we're talking about 10% of the population that you can actually survey that way. Flushing, you need to be almost on top of them, and they'll come out and they'll do a big circle and come back. So there's recounts, there's all sorts of issues. But what we found is that the surveyors are all being fairly consistent, and they're doing it on the same days. So one of my jobs is to analyse that against data we have at Jarrah Wetlands, which Alistair and Milbourne have been doing for 15 years, twice a week, same route, and they've given me their data. So I'm just like, I'll look at that and then this to see how well they correlate, and I can't even bear to think about the fact I haven't done it yet. But anyway, so that's just gives us an idea of some of the population fluctuations. So we're filling that picture. What I found really interesting on the bottom left graph there is the lighter colour is the urban areas. So by far and away, most of the sightings or most of the populations are around urban areas, and they love those little swampy wetlands that people think are valued, or don't have a lot of value. And the whole project actually started in Port Fairy because the council were going to develop this swamp. And it was a nondescript swamp. I've been there, you'd literally drive past it. But the South Beach, the Port Fairy South Beach, they're like at Land Care and Wetland Group down there went, oh no, you're not, we've got snipe living here. And it ended up in Land and Environment Court, where Begita actually was the what do you call it, star witness or whatever it is that they do in Environment Court. And they managed to save half the wetlands. And so then they said, we don't have enough information to make decisions about this bird. And that's how it actually started. And I got in touch with her a couple of years later going, what are these birds doing here turning up? And so we teamed up all those years ago. And then she did a whole bunch of research. So to ensure that it wasn't a feature of survey effort around urban areas, because more people might survey areas around their towns where they live. But she discovered it actually wasn't. They were using the urban areas more frequently. So that was really important info. I'm skipping the radio tracking because that's really boring. It's just like beep, 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 they're there, okay, whatever. There were 7 birds. What we learnt from radio tracking is that they were coming back to the same pond at night for that couple of months because it had the right amount of water at the time. The following year it was dry, no birds. Kelly Swamp at Jarrah dried up one of the years we were surveying. The significance of the geolocated data is this is T0, the very first bird that was ever caught after the 6 week. I don't know how they kept going for 6 weeks. Like I reckon after a week maybe there's some other way. The very first bird was caught a year later, 100 metres from where they caught it the first time and put the geolocator on, and they got all of the data off that little geolocator. So very inaccurate, but what it did show, they could piece together its journey. The bands in the middle is where it bred because it's light. So it's going light, dark, light, dark, light, with this bird sitting on a nest potentially. And it was the first indication we had of a bird coming back to the same site. So then we were all excited, obviously. And then we had another one from Canberra do the same. So our likelihood of catching birds went up as we got better and better at working out how to do it. Once we started tracking them, we knew where they were. So we would just target the site, and we caught up to, sometimes you usually catch 1 or 2, but we ended up catching 12 or 14 at some of the catches once we worked out where they were. The satellite data, less accurate, but we started to get a picture of some of the hotspot sites they were using, and they were all going to the same sort of area in Papua New Guinea. So that they weren't as accurate, but it gave us a good picture, a very expensive picture. And we never got a full migration. But the Japanese, they got, I think, 4 birds that did full migrations. And so they've given us their data so we can overlay what we've got, which is really great. One bird spent 2 months in Namadgi National Park, which was really cool. And I went out there and took photos and sent it back to Japan for them. So that was really just luck, to be honest. And so what we've done with all of this data is put it together. We've worked out, obviously Canberra is a hotspot for them as a destination, and also down in South Australia. But they're using places like the Hunter. Nearly every bird went to Guida wetlands, as did a lot of Heather McGuinness's ibises that she's tracking and the little eagle. So they're all following a very similar migration path or flight path. Then they're up in the sugarcane, they're up at PNG, and then we're able to map a path. And so not a single bird went out to the west as was originally thought. Doesn't mean you wouldn't get the odd vagrant, but it's not usual, we don't think. So that brings us to our Bluetooth devices, which I get all excited about. We use some Ultras, which are supposed to just connect to the 5G network without a tower, but it's so early, such early tech. Like we trialled them, they were hopeless. So I've got a credit now with Druid, which is good because we've got more tracking devices. We're currently raising money to send the whole team to South Australia to do this there to get some comparative data. But that will just be as a fun volunteer thing to do, or hopefully this PhD will be finished by then. So they're really little devices and they sit really nicely on the back of the bird. And out of 35 devices we put on, we've had 6 birds back and really good data from 32. So we know they're carrying these devices really well. They're really light. They're like 2.8 grams or something. And we use leg loop harnesses. So we did use chest harnesses for a while with the satellite, but we had to construct an entire wetland inside the visitor centre at Jarrah Wetlands in a tent with the day release prisoners from Alexander McConaughey. And so, you know, we were putting in plants, reeds, we had trays. My job was to sift through the compost to get out all the bugs, and it was just, I don't know why we thought that was a good idea. And then we had to stay up all night and watch them. And then invariably a bird would get its beak stuck and we had to take it all off and let it go. So going to leg loop with the advice of CSIRO and Heather, we haven't had issues. There was one bird that managed to preen its beak into its thing, but it got it out again. So fortunately, because we were worried at that point, but they've all been okay and we've tracked them now. So the results of that, it's just so accurate. So there's the wetlands down the bottom. You can see exactly what they're doing there. One bird went off to Nowra for the weekend, as Canberrans do. They go up. Interestingly, we're finding out some strange things about learning. So one bird went to Gunning for two days, right near a wetland that we'd restored with the River Restoration Centre. So that was exciting. Came back to the wetlands for 2 months and then went back to Gunning for 2 weeks before it migrated. So it's like they do these little exploratory trips to just see where the food is. One went to Googong, you know, it's just really interesting. The older birds, the 3 older birds where we knew the age of that we'd recaptured, didn't move. They just stayed within a hectare, whole season, couldn't be bothered, straight up north, like, you know, so we don't have enough data to make any sweeping assumptions, and then we also can track light and speed, and with the help of a guy called Jason McKenzie, who's a data expert, have managed to look at where they're roosting and foraging. So roosting's in purple, foraging's in green, and you can see during the day they roost and then they go off to feed at night and come back, and they got really distinctive patterns, and they were there for the whole, apart from Nowra bird and Gunning bird and a few others. They're pretty much there for the whole season at the wetlands. So we've got our own birds. Yeah, and so we've got our own birds and they stay at the wetlands. And as I said, the 3 older birds that we know the age of barely moved. So their home range was anywhere from 0.1 of a hectare up to 99, I think. And they move from average about 2.5 kilometres between roosting and foraging, some up to 6 and some none. So we're starting to get an idea of this, and the importance of that is, apart from the fact they love can turf, in fact can turf possibly was a big saviour for them during the drought because they were irrigating, and Kelly's swamp had dried up and they were all at that time roosting in the Typha reeds, going over to can turf to feed every night. So we know that from our satellite data. And the guys at Canturf are really keen, like they love them. They've got the app on their phone because being Bluetooth, you can track them on your phone as well as the tower. And so they're always got their eyes open for us and tell us if there's an issue. irrespective of farming and rivers and whatever else, which is my other life in this instance. It's not the only example of snipe relying on turf farms. There are other waders. I guess it makes sense. Anywhere irrigated with the right habitat, they seem happy. And then we split that into all of the 32 birds to look at individual movement, and then we did a whole bunch of stats that resulted in us being able to look at home range. And so this is where we can look at home range area, roosting, foraging, and then down the side is the top one's roosting habitat, so it's good cover. That's where you'll see them in the day. At night, they're out in the cow paddocks in the mud, and they'll also head up to some of the farmland. They like going up to Majura and fossicking around the dams up there, out to the paleo channels. And the interesting thing about that is we only ever survey them in the day. So we're missing this whole suite of behaviours that we just didn't know about. And one of the comments on the paper was, how do you know they're foraging? And I'm like, we've been out and filmed them. Like, you know how you have to justify everything in a paper. But not only that, we have all the behavioural data off the GPS, which shows activity at night. So, you know, we did that, but quite different behaviours. And then one day I went up just to test the tower for the next season's data, because all the birds went. And I thought I would just download the data, and then I nearly fell over because I had all this data from 2 birds that actually went all the way to Japan and all the way to Russia, and then came back to the wetlands and flew back past the tower and downloaded all the data. And I was ordering a coffee while I was looking at it, which wasn't good because I was babbling incoherently at this poor woman who was making the coffee really fast. I just couldn't believe it. I was looking at it just going, oh my gosh, like what's... And we've had now 6 birds come back. So now we've got a decent data set to start to look at migration, not just local, but it'll be more qualitative. It'll be like the bird flew from here to here and it was flapping this fast and it was doing this. It won't be... I doubt I've got quite enough to analyse. And we're also looking a bit at habitat. And so the data there, it's really accurate down to 5 metres. So not only can we see exactly where they're going, we know how long they've been there, we know what field they're sitting in, and then we're sharing some of this with the Wild Bird Society to do some joint papers and things with their data as well. So I might leave that there. So I don't go over, but I'll just acknowledge the fact that there is so many people involved in this project. I don't expect you to read them, but these are the people, and then all the organisations down the bottom, of which I still need to add BirdLife Australia to, because they're a more recent donor. And then, yeah, half of them are my family because I can't get out of it. When we got to do a last minute catch, it's like, man, the troops, and it's my daughter and my sister and her kids, and you know, so that's been a nice aspect. And then we also have a really active Facebook page where people from around Australia put their photos on, share their photos. It's really pleasant. And then we have a website, and feel free to get in touch if you want to come and help in South Australia, incidentally. This will be our next one. Thank you. I'll leave it at that.